having the right perspective about life situations and life troubles. But let me give you guys just a quick synopsis for this series that we'll be spending 4 weeks on. If I could give it an idea or concept behind it, let me just read this. Is the sun rising or is it falling? Is the night full of lonely darkness or is it the cool, relaxing, peaceful, and is it a time of rest? You know, the whole, is the cup half full or is it half empty or is it just getting a little bit full? We struggle with these perspectives, these thoughts. Is happiness dependent on whatever life throws at us, or do we have some sort of say in the situation? Can we find peace in chaos? Contentment despite life's limitations, and joy in our lowest moments. We've got to ask God to help us with our perspective, because we can find ourselves completely and totally overwhelmed. I don't know if you guys have ever been there in this kind of experience, but the first 5 minutes of your day, usually you're waking up. At least this has been maybe a little more for me as of recent, because I'm not getting enough sleep as is. But have you ever woke up in the morning and thought to yourself, or even moaned, "Oh God"? Come on. Have you ever done that? Not like in a derogatory way towards God, but like, "Oh God, please help me. I am exhausted. I am so tired. I'm so overwhelmed." Have you ever felt like the day was going to be so overwhelming that the noise comes and the chaos grows deep, and our heart's attitude seems to change like the weather? Has anything changed? Are our circumstances any better? Our heart's attitudes just get worse and worse and worse. Perspective, let's be real for a minute here. Perspective is the driving force which fuels the attitude of every reaction. Our perspective or outlook on life determines who we are, what we believe, and who we'll become. It does. You guys remember the Berlin songwriter and co-founder of ASCAP? Life is 10% of what you make it and 90% of how you take it. Remember that song? Have you ever heard somebody say, 10% is the actual situation, 90% is your perspective or your perception or your thought of the situation? Have you ever worked yourself up into an absolute anxiety attack kind of moment and then got to the end of the day and realized that you wasted energy on nothing that had any value? Nothing that really needed your attention, nothing that really needed you to be so overwhelmed and so driven? It seems to me today, in our culture, that a dismal outlook on life is almost natural. I mean, we could be some pretty miserable people. I'm not trying to be mean this morning. I'm talking to myself. I mean, you can ask my wife at any point whatsoever if I'm a good morning person. I've tried and tried and tried. And usually the first 15 to 40 minutes, she doesn't talk to me. And that's okay. It's okay. Because I'm hard to wake up next to sometimes. Don't look at me like that. You know you are too. There it is. But have you guys noticed at times that we can have this outlook like, my job stinks, or I wish I had a better car, I wish I was living in a different house or a better house, or I wish things would go better, I wish I was making more money. Things never seem enough. We always feel like the grass would be greener somewhere else, that things would be better in a different situation. I wish that, there are moments that envy is something so controlling. It contributes to our misery. We just look at other people and we're just like, "Oh, I want this. I desire this. I yearn for this. I want my life to be better. I want the situation to be better. I want to find myself in a better place." I don't know if you guys heard this morning, and I'm trying to remember his name, but just an overwhelming example of how perspective can change everything is a young man who starred on the show Glee. I don't know if anybody in this room knows anything about that show, but it's a huge show. I don't watch it myself. But, and I can't even remember his name. Maybe somebody in the room knows what I'm talking about. But there was a young man found in his hotel room in Canada dead. He's gone. Drugs were probably a factor. Perspective. I mean, I know that it seems like I'm kind of, saying a lot about just perspective, but there are so many people that I've encountered in this life that a shift in perspective could have changed their entire life. A person who lives in places of discontent, overwhelmed by life, feeling so frustrated about a dead-end job or a car that doesn't run. When's the last time you thought to yourself, well, at least I have a job? Or at least the car is running. At least I have a vehicle. At least I can get to point A to point B. C might be a struggle, but getting to A to B that's a good start. Perspective is so important. Perspective is so critical. I think of I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Broadway show Stomp or ever heard about it, but some people might think that trash cans and dumpsters and all these trash-like items being banged together is nothing but noise and clutter in our minds and just irritating. But Luke Creswell and Steve Nicholas thought of a different way. He created a beautiful orchestra that saw an awesome opportunity. They're the founders of the show Stomp that's on Broadway that's captivated the masses and earned millions because they took items that were used for trash to create music. I don't know if you guys remember several months ago, actually it might have been longer than that, I preached a series of messages on the life of Nehemiah. Nehemiah looking at a wall that was in rubble. All the people around him overwhelmed, thinking, this is it, our enemies are going to come after us. It's over with, it's done with. And Nehemiah looks at this mountain of rubble and he sees an opportunity. He sees a valuable moment where he can step up and talk to a king and get the confidence he needs to walk into the plan of God. And a whole town and strengthen nation of Israel, while opening doors to share God's truth, is something that all happened in that story. When's the last time you looked at a wall of rubble as an opportunity for God to do something amazing? Or do you just look at it and think, this is bad, and it's over? He saw the potential in safeguarding that city. He saw potential in a moment that many of us would not have seen potential in. I want to talk to you guys about a guy that we're all familiar with. His name's Paul. If you guys want to, you can go in your Bibles to Philippians chapter 1. That's where we'll be. It'll be up on the screen as well, but maybe you guys can open up your apps and that kind of stuff too. Get there. This is going to be good. Paul, you guys know his story. There's this guy who's a persecutor of Christians. His name was Saul at first. He was there for the first martyr of the first believer of Christ, and he was experiencing this. It was his decision to assault everyone who believed in Jesus. And he had a moment with Christ, a bright light shining moment that knocked him off a horse on his way, on one of his journeys, and it woke him up to the truth, and it radically changed his life. He was a man full of the Spirit, and he traveled all over the place, planting churches in different cities. He loved to go to places of big exports because he knew that when he impacted people in those communities, they would get on their ships and go to other places and spread the gospel, the good news, the hope that he was traveling around spreading, that they would take it with them. This guy was a church planter of church planters. And of the churches that he planted, Philippi was one of the ones that truly adored him and he adored them. This church was planted on his second missionary journey in around 52 AD. This was somewhere around 20 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And these people loved him. And 10 years later, around 62 AD, just give you guys some background here, this church in Philippi sent an offering to Paul. And if you know anything about Paul's story, you know that Paul wasn't really that keen on taking offerings from churches. Paul liked to take care of his own. He didn't want to be a burden. But in this instance, Paul allowed the offering to come in. He accepted the offering, and he was so filled with gratitude that he sent a letter as a thank you note. And along with it, he left some loving instruction. The major theme of Philippians is joy. There are actually 19 references to joy or to rejoice. And Paul had a massive amount of joy. But there was no reason in the natural for Paul to be joyful. I mean, he was full of joy. He was excited. He was pumped. This church in Philippi met a need. He was so thankful. He was so filled with gratitude, so very, very loving as he sent this letter. And you read through this letter and you think to yourself, man, this is a guy so full of happiness, so full of joy, so full of peace. But in the instances of this story, key pieces of knowledge change our perspective at times. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this before, but I know I have. I've found myself in places of misery where I'm complaining a lot or griping a lot or frustrated a lot. And then I hear a story about someone else. And I think, what is wrong with me? Seriously. Why do I have reason to complain about this or that? Why am I griping about this stupid stuff when someone else is going through serious turmoil and serious struggle in their life? And when we look at Paul and we look at the joy that Paul had, we don't recognize a man who's in prison. We don't recognize a man who's been locked up. We don't recognize a man who's facing trial. You see, if you look at this, he's been locked up for 2 years simply for preaching the gospel. He is literally chained to a Roman soldier 24 hours a day. And though Paul wanted to go to Rome as a preacher, he instead went as a prisoner. And Paul is in the middle of yet another trial. Things aren't playing out well for him. He's just doing what he's called to do, and he finds himself in a mess. The truth is he is awaiting a possible execution. He doesn't know for sure. He's not certain about his future. All he knows is that this trial that he's encountering in this prison sentence could lead to the end of his life, an execution. And he pens these words in that moment. You want to talk about somebody who had the right perspective. Philippians 1, starting with verse 1, it says, "Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ." Actually, starting with verse 2. "I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. It is right for me to feel this way about all of you, since I have you in my heart. For whether I am in chains or defending and confirming the gospel, all of you share in God's grace with me." He is full of joy. This guy is happy. I mean, read this story. He's found himself in a place where many of us couldn't find ourselves. I mean, can you imagine? I'm going to do what God called me to do. I had an experience with Jesus Christ. I'm going to travel and share the good news with people, and then it ends you in a place in a prison, chained to a Roman guard. 24 hours a day. Let's talk about miserable. Listen to this. We all have a what and don't understand the why. Don't we? We all have a what and don't understand the why. It's a job, right? It's the broken family relationship, right? It's the struggle, the trouble. You know, we all have a what and don't understand the why. Some of us are in places right now where we're just like, okay, God, I know that I'm in the midst of this. Oh, help me make sense of this. God always has a why behind a what, though. Always. We all have a what and don't understand the why. God always has a why behind the what. An example to this. My father, heroin, crack cocaine user. One of those moments that you grow up and you wonder why. I grew up without a dad, and I wondered and wondered why. It wasn't that God placed me in that situation or, made misery in my life, but God has a powerful way of using what could have been detrimental, painful, and disrupting to a person's life for His purpose. And this is an important one. This third thought is an important one. You guys have got to grab this. I don't have to understand why to trust God in the what. And this is difficult. Because let's face it, we all want to know why. In fact, that would probably be the extent of many of our prayers. We all want to know why. Well, why, God? Why? I don't understand the why. I don't understand what's going on. What is this? Why am I in this? What is going on here? I get frustrated sometimes, and I've even found myself guilty of this, but sometimes, people who preach the gospel kind of bait people along, and they're like, if you accept Jesus, everything's going to play out great. Everything's going to be perfect. Everything's going to lead to happiness and joy. And everything's going to be dandy. You're going to have all you ever wanted. Everything's going to be great. But there are moments, correct me if I'm wrong, that living for Christ has caused some agony in your life. It caused some pain. That have hurt. I want to challenge you guys to ask yourself 2 questions this morning. Ask yourselves. There are 2 questions that you should ask when life is hard. The first question is, now what? Now what? Not, why is this happening? But now what? This happened. Now what? This is going on. Now what? This is the reality. This is the situation. This is what I'm going through. This is what I'm facing. This is what I'm experiencing. Now what? Life isn't what I thought it would be. Things aren't going as I expected. Our perspective has got to shift. Instead of thinking of all the misery and pain and agony that we think we're in, and getting ourselves in those places of pure misery within ourselves. Okay, now what? Now what? I don't like what's going on, but now what? I'm really uncertain in this situation, but now what? God, I trust you with the why. And I know, and I now want to know what you want to do in me. What is the plan? Now what? Philippians 1:12. This is what it says. Now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Oh, hold on, wait a minute. Paul is faced with a now what moment. Okay? I'm in prison. I'm locked up. Things aren't going well. I wanted to come to Rome as a preacher, but I came to Rome as a prisoner. Now what? Now what do I do? Now where do I go? Now what do I accomplish? How do I go about my plan? He's actually saying right here, that he's speaking of facts. Now what for Paul? You know what? It has actually advanced the gospel. Advance is actually a term used to pioneer. It's the progress of an army expedition. This really means to cut undergrowth or to clear obstacles that would prevent progress. That's what it means to advance. You mean to tell me that Paul is in prison facing a serious obstacle, and he's actually talking about how that moment is clearing obstacles and things that would prevent progress? We've got to change our perspective. You see, God specializes in making incredible opportunities out of our greatest troubles. And think about it this way. Obstacles become opportunities. Obstacles become opportunities. Obstacles, the troubles, the difficulties. When you have nothing left, when your resources are gone, when you are drained, when you are exhausted, when there is nothing left to you, it's in those moments, church, listen to me on this. It is in those moments where you say, oh, I'm so done. And God is like, finally, I can start now. I can begin to move. I can help now. Why are we so stubborn sometimes? We try to do it on our own. We try to change situations. We try to fix them. And then when they don't go right, we get in our places of misery and discontent, and we're cantankerous and irritable. Guys, I'm talking to myself too. Obstacles become opportunities. Listen to this. Setbacks actually become setups. Setbacks actually become setups. Would you believe that God can create purpose in your prison? If you let God, your prison will become your pulpit. In the middle of the things that you don't want to be in, even when you can't necessarily see it, God is working through it. In Philippians 1:13, it says, as a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. He is chained to a man 24 hours a day. They're taking shifts. Who's the audience now? He has an opportunity to speak to the palace guard. It's like, hold up, wait a minute here. Okay, who's chained to who? Who's got the challenge here now? This centurion guard, this guard that's chained to me, who's the one with the challenge? Who's the one with the difficulty? Yeah, I'm here because of Christ, but this guy has to stand next to me. He can't leave me because it's his responsibility to guard me. You know what? I'm going to use this as an opportunity. I'm going to speak to this man about the truth. And then when his shift is over and the next guy comes in, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to speak to him too. And you know what? When his shift is over and the next guy comes in, because he's chained to me and he can't go anywhere, God used Paul's prison as a pulpit. God used Paul's situation as an opportunity to advance the gospel. Those who were chained to him could not go anywhere. His perspective was different. He saw every moment as an opportunity. Who was the real prisoner there? I mean, think of Paul. He's persuasive. This man is a speaker, and he has accomplished great things for the gospel. And he's chained to a centurion guard, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to use this moment as an opportunity. The test you are enduring today will become the testimony you tell tomorrow. I mean, I got some examples of this. Think about this. I love this story, and I've told it before, but I remember when Marge broke her femur, and she had to be in the hospital for some time. Yeah, I'm talking about you. And I remember when they put her in the nursing home. You want to talk about frustrating and miserable? I mean, I've met some people. I've gone to the nursing home before and found people that are truly struggling because they don't want to be there. In fact, they put her with someone who was struggling, who didn't want to be there. And I remember going to see you a few times, Marge, and those people, that woman that you were with was just, she wasn't nice. She was kind of miserable at times. But I remember this too. The more Marge was there, the more this woman broke down. The more Marge was there and talked to her and communicated with her and spoke with her, her guard started to lower. I remember the last time I saw her, because Marge checked out of the nursing home and went home, and I told myself, I'm going to continue to go see this woman. I went back to see her, and I'm sitting down with her, having a conversation with her, and I said, are you certain, because this woman that Marge was placed with was dying of cancer. She knew that her time was limited. And I remember sitting on her bed with her, and I just looked at her in the eyes and said, are you certain about eternity at this point? Do you know for certain what's going to happen when you take your last breath on this planet? And her first response to me was, Marge made sure I knew. We have to have a better perspective about our situations. We can find ourselves in pretty mean places because we don't like the outcomes, or we don't like where we land. We don't like what's going on. We don't like what's happening. Our misery can become our ministry. Philippians 1:14, this is what it says. It says, because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. Paul is like, not only am I able to minister to the centurion guard, not only am I able to speak truth to these people, because of my chains, others are being more courageous and more full of faith. Refuse to allow your perspective to put you in a hole. You ask God to shed light on every bit of what you're going through. You ask yourself that question. I'm here, now what? I'm here, now what? What do? I'm chained to a centurion guard. Paul, I'm chained to a centurion guard. Now what? I don't like where I'm in. I'm in a nursing home. Now what? Right? I don't like my situation. I'm in a house I don't want to be in a marriage that I'm struggling with kids that I want to strangle sometimes. Now what? Seriously, where do we do? What do we do? Where do we go with that? We've got to have the right perspective, because the moments of struggle for our lives can become God's greatest opportunity to shine. Revealing weakness doesn't make our faith look less. Sometimes we walk around and feel like we've got to be powerful and strong so other people think that our Christianity is the best thing. But sometimes the greatest thing you can do is reveal to people that you are weak and how trusting in God you are, because they see in you someone who can't do it alone and can only do it with Him. Now what? Now what? The next question you got to ask yourself is, so what? Now what and so what? This will make sense. Philippians 1:15 through 18 says, it is true that some of you preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Hold on, wait a minute. He's in chains. He's in a prison. And we're not talking about the penitentiaries we have today. I don't even want to think about the deplorable situations that they had to be in then. And he's in prison, and he's saying, what does it matter? What's the big deal? So what? So what? We've got to ask ourselves the same questions. Is it going to matter 100 years from now? Like, there's some things that we complain about that we just need to say too. Like there have been a few moments, at this point, we've been married almost 12 years now, and my wife doesn't even have to say it. She just looks at me. Like I'm having one of those, I need to say so what moments. Like I need to have one of those. Like, you know, sometimes I can be dramatic. And she's just looking at me like, really, honey? So what? And we've got to have those moments too, because we can get trapped in this. And our perspective can be so drawn to what we're experiencing, what we're facing, that it just envelops us. I mean, think about these things. The internet went down. So what? Right? My stupid phone won't connect. I can't find a signal. So what? You know, a bigger one. I got to take a cold shower. So what? There are people in other countries that would just love to have running water. There are people in our own country that would love to have running water. There are certain things, some things really matter, some things simply don't matter. And when you recognize what doesn't matter, you can begin to focus on the things that truly matter. You can begin to focus your intent on what is important, what really, really matters. Let me give you guys a perfect example of this, of a so what moment. 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting in the Buckland home and I'm talking to Bucky. And I'm watching, his wife is there, his daughter is there, and his grandson is there. And Bucky is about to face a so what moment. He is dying. I announced this morning that he's home with the Lord. And this grandson, we had an opportunity there that morning. We're talking about heaven. We're talking about glory. We're talking about all the great things that await those who will be in paradise. Just encouraging one another, encouraging Bucky. And this young man, Bucky, has a so what moment. He looks at this young man, and I want you to remember this. He's dying of cancer. He looks at his grandson and says, "Do you know Jesus? Do you? Are you certain about your eternity? Are you certain that you'll go to heaven when you pass?" And we began to talk. We began to communicate. It was on a Thursday. I remember coming to Outbreak that night saying, "Guess what, guys? I just led a young man to the Lord at the Buckland home." Because Bucky had a so what moment. I mean, we have so what moments about silly and foolish things. We have so what moments about things that really don't matter. This man had a so what moment about something that really did matter. It did matter that he was facing this disease and he was facing this struggle, but Bucky's like, you know what? So what? What this young man needs is more important than what I'm going through right now. Philippians 1:21-24 say, "For to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, but it is more necessary for me, it's more necessary for you that I remain in the body." When Paul was writing this letter, he was awaiting a trial that would determine whether he faced the death penalty or was released. And he was able to experience this freedom. He was able to place things in perspective in life. What really matters? Jesus Christ, that's it. That's it. If I were to die tomorrow and it meant that the gospel advanced, that would be okay. My young 13-year-old friend, the boy that my son has the middle name of, Randall, 13 years old, died. He's gone. Died at a young age. I mean, barely lived. And I'll never forget being with his family. And they had a so what moment. They said, and I don't mean to belittle their suffering and pain, but they thought to themselves, at the funeral itself, people came to Christ. So if that was the cost for them to find hope and find a promise of glory, then my son being lost on this planet is okay. Because I know he's in a better place. I mean, there are things that we truly need to say that are hard sometimes. Some things that we have to just, you know what? So what? I can't change it. I can't. I can't. Things aren't going to get any better for this situation. So what? God, help me to just realize that some things aren't very important, and the things that we feel are really important, and the things that are important, there are some moments where we're just going to dismiss it and think of the greater purpose in all of it. Our perspective has to change. Our perspective has to change. And some of us are just whiners and we need a deal. We just complain about silly things. It's too this, it's too that, it's too hot, it's too cold. Food's not right, you know. I mean, we have food. You know, we've got to change our perspective. It's a trap, it's a prison. It really is. Like if you're in a wrong place, the wrong perspective, if you have the wrong views, you can't seem to climb yourself out of that misery. It's an unending cycle. And your friends are looking at you and they're like, really? You're being ridiculous. And you're like, no, everything's bad. It's awful. It's horrible. I'm so miserable. I can't handle this. And your family's looking at you like, shut up. Shift your perspective, guys. Shift your perspective. Shift your thought. When you're in the moment, now what? And there are some times that you're going to have to think to yourself, so what? Oh well. Let me ask you guys these questions as I close today. What's something you wish was different in your life? And how would a change in perspective help? What's that thing? What's your now what or so what moment? What's your now what moment? The serious struggle, the difficulty. Now what? What's your now what moment? And the other things, the things that aren't really that significant, the things that don't really matter. What's your so what moment? And how can you change your perspective? Next, how can God use your setback in the right now moment and use it as a setup? What does God want to do? What does God want to take out of that situation to create an opportunity? I mean, some of us right now, we're in jobs and we are so frustrated. I talked to a minister just yesterday, Pastor Paul's wife, his wife's mom. And she's been in ministry for a long, long time. And she said that one of the things that she did earlier on in her life was she was a brewer at a beer factory. You want to talk about a job that is not really aligned with someone's belief pattern. I mean, she's like talking to me about how God used that opportunity for His glory, how God used that opportunity for His purpose. How can God use your setback as a setup? 2 more questions, just real quick. Your misery can become your ministry. What do you think God is trying to do through whatever circumstance you're facing right now? What does God want to do? What does He want to do? Because I assure you that He's got a better good for you than you could ever come up on your own. He's got such a great good for you, such a great opportunity for you. What does God want to use that circumstance you're facing right now? What does He want to use it for? And this is the important one right here. What steps will you take to begin changing your perspective so you can find joy no matter what circumstance you may be facing? What are you going to do right now? I'll tell you one important thing. Get in the Bible. Get in the Bible. Read more. It'll change you. It will. Pray more. Try to get to church more. It'll change you. I'm telling you. There are things that you've got to begin to proceed forward in so that your perspective can change. Because the wrong perspective creates prisons and leaves us in places of misery. Why am I so passionate about this subject? Because I know that I have been trapped in wrong perspectives myself. And I want to see you guys find freedom. I want to see you guys find hope. Now what? So what? Those are easy questions. I'm in it. Now what? Oh, this is ridiculous. So what? Think about it, guys. Shift your perspective. Look at Paul. What's most important? Jesus Christ. Everything else doesn't matter. There are people that have went through such suffering and such agony their whole life and died a miserable death, and it's all been worth it. If we realized sometimes what a blink this life is and how vast eternity is, we wouldn't be so overwhelmed in our moments right now. You with me? Okay. Father, I thank you for this morning, God. I pray that you would help us with our perspective. God, change us. I pray, Father, that we would see the truth, that we would recognize what is real, that we would have our now what and so what moments. God, that we would recognize the things that do matter, the troubles that we are facing, the moments where things are challenging and difficult, and that we would ask ourselves, God, now what? Now what? Yep. And secondly, God, that we would look at the things that really don't matter and we would be okay to dismiss them. I would push them to the side and realize that they're taking up space in us and causing suffering in us that we don't need to deal with. Give us peace today, God, as we trust ultimately in you and as we pursue to give the truth and the hope of Jesus Christ to this world. That would be at the top of everything that we do. Like Paul, even in chains, he found an opportunity. That we would find opportunities in every place that we are in. It's in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.